It's about 8 in the morning, and I'm driving along Greenwood Avenue in Tulsa, Oklahoma, past the First Church of God in Christ, past a series of low brick buildings, probably built in the 40s, looks like. At the turn of the century and up into about 1920, Greenwood was a thriving African-American neighborhood in Tulsa that Booker T. Washington called the Negro Wall Street because it was filled with businesses and a general prosperity due to people who worked in the oil and the mining industries in Tulsa. And it was a very self-contained neighborhood. Tulsa back then, as now, was a segregated place, and it was doing quite well. Greenwood covered about 36 square blocks, and I'm going to drive around the perimeter more or less of what those square blocks were. Unfortunately, they don't exist in the way they did then. This is the Carver Middle School, George Washington Carver Middle School. So you can see it's pretty much empty spaces and new buildings in this neighborhood right now. And there's a reason for that. In 1919, there was a flu epidemic, of course, that swept America and swept Tulsa as well. Caused a lot of problems for everyone. But Greenwood continued to thrive through that. Then, in 1921, a local black young man was accused of bothering a white elevator operator, a woman. And he was arrested and taken to jail. Soon, a mob appeared at the jail, a mob of white men. Maybe there were some women, but I've only heard of white men being there. And basically, they were there to administer their own justice, which probably would have been a lynching. Another group of black veterans, military veterans, showed up. A small group. They showed up to protect the young man who had been taken to the jail. I believe they were able to take him out and run towards Greenwood. I'm not certain of that fact, but they definitely ran towards Greenwood. They're in this neighborhood that we're driving around right now. The mob followed. The mob was armed, and the mob started shooting. There's some dispute about whether the neighborhood at the time continued across those railroad tracks or not. The tracks we just passed over, but this is the outline that I'm accepting for today. taken us down a little detour through an industrial area, so you can see how vast and open these spaces are that once constituted a neighborhood of businesses, houses, and thousands of residents. As the group of veterans fled for their lives, basically, from the jail where they were trying to protect the young man who had been accused of touching a white girl in an elevator. She was an elevator operator. They were shot at, and everyone else was shot at also, and the mob increased. And the police and the National Guard showed up, but they just helped the mob. It became basically a genocide against a community within Tulsa. And little kids and grandparents, there were reports at the time that little kids and older people were running for their lives, screaming. Mothers were trying to find their children. Adults were hiding. It was terror. There's no other way to put it. It was a terrorist attack on a community. It was mob rule, and the state was complicit. They killed hundreds of people. No one is sure how many. The dead have never truly been identified. They're believed to be buried in mass graves that exist in Tulsa right now. And the mayor of Tulsa, currently a white Republican man, has recently announced a mission of exhuming those bodies and trying to identify them where possible, but at least honor these people who died. The violence didn't stop with shooting guns. Someone mounted a machine gun, which was a pretty new, incredible tool of the day, on top of a nearby grain elevator and fired on the masses in Greenwood, in this neighborhood, this black neighborhood. And then planes appeared in the skies, dropping turpentine bombs that were aflame and lit the buildings below aflame. Photos of the attack show smoke pouring from all parts of Greenwood, people running. And suddenly an entire community was homeless. All because a mob wanted to lynch a young man who had been accused of touching a young white woman, a young black man accused of touching a young white woman. Thousands of the homeless black citizens of Greenwood were rounded up and put into internment camps for several weeks. Insurance claims weren't honored. The incident was hidden. Right here is the other end of Greenwood Avenue, and it's interesting. It sells Black Wall Street t-shirts and souvenirs, natural herbs. There's a barber. It's Greenwood, a small kind of theme park version of Greenwood, but Greenwood nonetheless. Welcome to Greenwood. The other day, I received a message from an acquaintance of mine who grew up in Oklahoma City and has spent her entire life in Oklahoma. She's about 60 years old. And she saw an article I had posted about this massacre with photographs. And she wrote me outraged, not that I had posted the story, but outraged that she had grown up in this state, gone to the public schools, to the university, and she had never once heard about this Greenwood Massacre until last week when I posted an article about it. And she said to me, I wonder how many other massacres or issues like this have been hidden. She's white, and she couldn't believe this had happened. And I think she felt horrified that it had been covered up. This is the campus of Oklahoma State University. It's a very pretty place, and this is where Greenwood was. I'd like us to remember Greenwood. It's a place I've thought about often in the last few years since I first heard about it. I'm 62. And I do believe there are many, many other incidents of violence against U.S. citizens, racist attacks, other attacks that we don't know about, because if my travels in America have taught me anything, it's that we as a country have a unique ability to mythologize ourselves. And it serves those in power very well, and it keeps those of us who aren't in power content. So I hope this video, my little part of trying to understand what happened in Oklahoma City, I hope this video makes you less content.